We have spent a fair bit of time talking about tomorrow and which way the dust will settle within the Republican primary. But the race is also a test for the state's Democrats, some of whom are finding themselves in new competitive districts. And the results of tomorrow's elections will run headlong into the state's restrictive voting laws come November. Joining us now, Representative Nikema Williams, who also chairs the Democratic Party of Georgia, and LaTosha Brown, co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. I am very upset that I did not get the memo to wear that beautiful shade of blue. I feel very left out. But that two-shot is gorgeous. You ladies look amazing. I'm going to start with you, Representative. It is interesting that you now do have in this state some people that are running against each other that normally probably would not. So Carolyn Boudreaux and Lucy McBath, who are two, solid Democratic congresswomen, now competing with each other because of redistricting.
It's unfortunate, but those are the stakes, the hands that we were dealt with the redistricting, the gerrymandering in the state. We know that we showed the country Georgia is a 50-50 state. And when it came to redistricting, Republicans were hell-bent on making sure that they redrew the lines to make sure that Democrats did not have an even voice and even say. So what they did was they made a new member of Congress, Lucy McBath, who flipped the district in 2018.
Newt Gingrich's district, not just any district.
A black woman. They gerrymandered her out of her district and made it a district that was not competitive after she won decisively a second victory in 2020. So here we are, and this is the hand that we've been dealt, and we refuse to allow the Republicans to tell us which members of Congress we're going to send back. And so now these two great Democratic women are running against each other in tomorrow's primary.
And it's interesting because just watching their ads, it's forcing Democratic base voters to choose between abortion rights and gun reform, because their ads are very different. They're both very compelling. But I didn't even realize until we came into the meetings, I've been watching all their ads thinking, oh, these are two great candidates. You're in the same race. So I wonder if that just complicates it more. Added to that, we still do have this restrictive voting law. And Stacey Abrams just said earlier, you can cover it up all you want and say, yes, lots of people voted, but that's lots of Republicans voting. That doesn't tell you what's happening with the laws.
That's right. And we're seeing that all across the board. At the end of the day, just because it's like making the argument saying, well, because people were able to escape from slavery, slavery didn't have an impact.
Right.
The bottom line is it absolutely has an impact. Even as we've been talking to voters, there's a sense of anxiety. What we're seeing is down numbers, low numbers, really, when it comes to voting absentee, the ballot boxes, all of those things, all of those voting tools that people had access that may or may not work a traditional 9-to-5 job, and and have access to being able to vote during the regular voting hours. And so I think we're seeing the impact. We're feeling the impact. We're seeing the impact, but we're doing the work. And then just because the numbers are coming up, that's reflective of people being determined and being upset about what is happening.
That's right.
Right. And we're expending resources, time, and energy to try to offset this racist law that has been put in place to punish black voters for participating in the last election.
It's like saying, you have to jump over this hurdle. Now I'm going to raise the hurdle another 2 feet. And if you jump over and say, see, there's nothing wrong with the hurdle. The hurdle's fine.
We've said all along, while we shouldn't have to organize our way out of voter suppression, we're going to do what it takes to make sure that our people have a voice in this electoral process.
There's an interesting race. I don't want to talk about Marjorie Greene, but she has an interesting potential general election race. There's a black man who's running, and he's running. His ads are on almost more than anybody else.
I actually went to high school with him.
Did you go to high school with him?
In Alabama.
It is so interesting watching his race. So he is, let me find, Marcus Flowers. That's his name, Marcus Flowers. He's running these interesting ads that are all biographical. He doesn't mention her. So if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know he was running against her. But what's happening in his district, and I want both of you guys to comment on this, is now there are at least 2 majority black towns because of redistricting. If Marjorie Greene were to win re-election, she would now be representing a substantial number of African Americans. That, to me, sounds terrifying for them.
Which is unfortunate. And the voters in that district, in the Cobb County part of that district, which used to be in David Scott and Lucy McBath's district, they showed up during the hearings at the state capitol. They made their voices heard. They wanted to keep their community together. This is a district that touches my district right here in Atlanta, Joy, and it sprawls all the way up to the Tennessee-Georgia line. So these aren't communities of interest. This is Republican gerrymandering at its best, where they have designed this state to make sure that they can control how many Republican districts are in the state representing Congress.
It feels, LaTosha, like they designed a voting law to make it only easy for their voters to vote, and then say, see, look, it's a great law for everyone. And then they've designed these districts to essentially take black voters' power and shove it underneath somebody like Marjorie Greene, who has no interest in these people at all. I mean, how do you motivate voters when they're facing all of that?
You know, Joy, even to say how egregious it is that when you look at the last census, right, 100% of the population growth in the state of Georgia were communities of color.
Yeah.
And so somehow they drew this district and gerrymandered it in such a way that whether they packed districts, they put communities of color together, or they cracked them, right, where they would split them up like what we're seeing in this case, they were able to do that and actually come out of a map where they actually have more representation, although 100% of the growth have been communities of color. And so what we have to do, and we know this in the state of Georgia, that's why this gubernatorial election is so important. We have got to take over the state of Georgia, state politics from the top of the ticket on down, because we cannot continue to be punished because people participated. We're seeing that they have just been stealing. They're literally creating a process so that they can steal the election.
This is the thing, and I'll ask both of you to comment on this, because what happens is when then people vote, and then they say, well, I voted for X and it doesn't happen, but you don't control the state mechanisms.
That's right.
You don't control then it can't happen. And Republicans are very good at not letting anything happen for communities of color. Then those same communities of color feel dissatisfied and say, well, there's no point in me voting. It's a vicious cycle.
That's right.
How do you fight that vicious
cycle? There are local levels on the ballot right now. Every state legislative seat is up for a vote this year in Georgia. So those state house seats, those state senate seats that control the process here at the state capitol right behind us, those are on the ballot right now. And so we have to encourage our voters to turn out, to vote for those leaders so that we can change the face of power in this Capitol. Vote for our gubernatorial race, and our Secretary of State's race is on the ballot, which controls everything when it comes to elections in this state.
How do you communicate that to voters who are saying, but I voted already, I didn't get anything?
So, you know, when we talk to voters about, participating in the process. This is more about participation. This is really about power.
Yes,
how do we build power? And when do you have enough power? Right. You have enough power when your communities are taken care of, when your schools are adequately funded, when you have access to health care. We don't currently have that. And until we actually have the kind of resources, the kind of representation that we deserve in our communities, we've got to continue to fight. And so when we talk to our voters and we're talking to people on the ground, that's what we're talking to them about. We're saying that we're at this turning point in the state of Georgia where there is a new coalition of voters that are rising up. White voters, black voters, Latino voters, multiracial, multi-generational voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, the Republicans voted for 50 years to get rid of Roe. They never got tired.
That's right.
They said we'll keep voting for 50 years and we'll vote up and down from dog catcher on up till we get rid of Roe, and they never got tired. So I guess that's the question, is how do we make sure that, that voters of color and that young voters never get tired? You got to vote till you get what you want.